I'm still going to persist with this cheap old grinder, try and make it a bit better. What I want to try and improve upon is the small and flimsy tool rests that you get. Makes it very difficult to grind a decent tool on, can't rest it there properly. So what I plan for is to use the existing tool rests and sort of superimpose a more rigid and adjustable tool resting table over the top of it. Just a matter of some holes and some slots weld together, a big long bracket. Now the whole thing is going to stretch right across both grinding wheels to make it as rigid as possible. Bought a piece of hardware store black steel to make this of. It's quite horrible stuff to work with, and for some reason they varnish it as well. Makes it even more difficult to join together when you have to. But during the lockdown period, I don't think the metal merchants are open. There'll be no going down there to pick up any decent stuff. Trusty safe clamp there, stop it falling behind the washing machine if that's where it wants to go. Just squaring the ends off in normal fashion, or what I thought would be normal fashion. Would have helped if I'd have tightened up the collet, not had rotating cutters falling about all over the place. But this is one of the downsides of trying to video things that you're doing. You end up setting up two machines to both go off at the same time. Mistakes happen. Usually the mistakes are made with the camera, not with the milling machine. Now I've got the two upright pieces clamped together as a pair. I'll try and make them as a pair throughout the rest of the drilling and milling operations that they've got to have. There's really no point in making them one at a time. They will end up being different and taking twice as long, obviously. Been a big improvement to have some compressed air on the work. Just a lot easier to clean things off for taking measurements, things like that. Blows swarf and filings and chips all over the place, but I think I went for 50mm there. That's pretty much spot on. So I'm using the edge finder to locate the two holes. One hole will just remain as a hole so that the table can pivot upon that. The second hole is going to be the beginning of a curved slot that will allow the table to swing through an arc to adjust its angle as it presents itself to the grinding wheels. Now I'm just going to make a tiny little mark where I think that hole needs to go, using the hand wheels on the mill to position things, and you can position things very precisely with that. The risk is that you are one whole rotation of the wheel out. So as precise as it can be precisely 1.5 millimeters in the wrong place. So just double checking it with a steel rule, just to make sure that I haven't got a whole turn of the hand wheel out of place. Now with the two holes drilled, I will keep those two parts clamped together because they need to be set up in the rotary table to mill the curved slot. I'm going to try and do that with both pieces together at the same time as well. Putting the rotary table on the mill, that needs its own setting up, palaver, all of its own. Got to get the pivot of that table, the center point, in line with the spindle of the machine. So there's a something like a 16 millimeter end mill in the collet, upside down, and rotate the table around to get a 0 reading all the way around. It's a cheap, small, floppy table, which is why it moves when it gets cranked, but it is generally centered up. Now, following on from centering up the table, the work needs to be clamped in with the hole on the left properly centered up in the middle of the table, because that's what the pieces are going to pivot on. And then you move the table to the correct radius, which will align it with the second hole. So I'm going to go down in that hole, then rotate the table something like 31 degrees, whatever the model turned out being, to mill the arc slot that will allow the tool rest to pivot once it's back in the grinder. So it's only a 6 millimeter end mill, I've got a lot of steel to go through, and I need to take it just one piece at a time, sorry, small pieces at a time. The whole lot is at risk of flying out from those clamps. And it's broken through now, it's gone through the top piece and the bottom piece. It's starting to mill out some of the aluminium packing piece that's underneath it. That's the reason why that's there. Double checking and locating holes on the existing tool tables. This is 5mm. They're going to take a 6mm thread that the new table is going to bolt into. I honestly didn't bother to straighten up that tap die any better than by doing it by eye. It's a very shallow hole. It's only taken about 3 threads in the hole, so the consequences of getting the die off square are not very drastic. With the 2 upright pieces secured where they're going to go, I've now got 1 long piece going to go across 2 grinding wheels. That will make the whole arrangement a lot stiffer than if I just tried to make 2 tool rests, 1 at each end. Putting them both together, they're going to use each other's stiffness to make a much better assembly. This is only going to be a little tack weld just to get them in place. Full weld takes place away from the machine, and it also takes a lot longer. I'm going to go back over the weld there to fill in a few spotty bits. Now I want 4 cap screws at a pretty precise length. I want to set them up exactly at 10mm long. So I've already cut 1 screw off, and using the carriage dial on the lathe, I'll move that parting tool away from the chuck 10mm, and then putting the screw in the chuck, I'll rest the head under the parting tool, and using the lathe carriage, move that tool along 10mm according to the hand dial. So when that's parted off, that will be 10mm long. A bit risky parting off screws because you can't hold them that tightly. If they want to move, they will tear at the thread and start moving, and parting operation doesn't end well if the part starts moving around. No real dramas though, just let that waste piece fall out, go through the same procedure again for the last 2 screws, then they all end up the same length. Like I say, it's a horrible piece of metal to work with, so it took quite a bit of cleaning up. Couldn't wait to try it out. Now the angles on this tool bit are far too severe, but that's a demonstration of how you can move from one stone to the next and still get the same angle on the tool, provided of course the stones are kept the same diameter, which won't be difficult to do. You can rough it on the rough stone, bring it across to the fine stone to finish it off. And hopefully you end up with a decently created cutting tool with no faceted grinds on it. Number of tools that I have ground on this, it's been very easy to use. You can sharpen the tool, use it, it needs resharpening again, and you can come straight back on the same angle again. Just take the minimum amount of metal off and not waste the tool steel, which is what I've been doing before. It worked out okay, quite pleased with it.